If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you look around and think, oh, geez, this again? Where it's like you've been through this before, life is somehow trying to teach you a lesson, but you just haven't gotten it. This video is going to introduce some profound ideas that can make a big difference in how you experience those situations and can show you a path out of some of the frustration that that can cause. Now, before we get into it, if you want to get a complete rundown of a body-mind system designed to help you defeat and dismantle self-limiting patterns in your thought and action so you can improve your mindset from the bottom up, just go to bodymindclass.com. There's a free training there for you, fully in-depth, no fluff. I think you're going to like it. But for the time being, let's work with the idea that you will inevitably, over the course of your life, encounter pain and difficulty. But whether that pain and difficulty lead to suffering, well, that's an entirely different story. Now, one of the things that psychology and wisdom traditions agree on is that it's our attempt to deny or negate reality that leads to suffering. But when we're able to be with the pain and be with the difficulty of our experience and not attempt to change it or distort it, well, then it doesn't lead to suffering. Now, one of the things that might be going on in this situation where you find yourself encountering the same events seemingly over and over again, or you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, we have to wonder if there's some distortion going on here that leads to you finding yourself back in this situation. So one of the ways that we might start to make sense of this is an idea developed called the triangle of conflict. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. But this is developed by a psychiatrist named Habib Davanloo. And he says that basically the structure of our conflicts has these three components. There are repressed feelings, or feelings that for whatever reason our system is not able to tolerate effectively. That repression of feelings, I don't know which side it's on. Oh, it's on that side. That results in anxiety that we experience, which is sort of like a disorientation. It's also the kind of muscular tension that creeps in when we attempt to negate those feelings. Then there are the defenses that we engage in. And these are all sorts of behaviors, both what we do and how we do it. And those are a way to create distance from the pain and discomfort of anxiety and those intolerable feelings. And what Davanloo developed in intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy was the idea that it's these defensive behaviors that are actually the cause of our suffering, that we actually contribute to these situations over and over again through our defenses. And we only engage in those defenses so as to distance ourselves from the painful perception of anxiety and intolerable feelings. Now, what this means is that if we can interrupt our defenses and we can regulate our anxiety and we can feel our feelings at the full intensity of them, then we are free from suffering. It doesn't mean that we're never going to encounter pain and difficulty. We will. But when we can actually feel our feelings, we're able to make use of that information and that energy that wouldn't otherwise be available to us. And in doing so, we're better able to meet that pain and difficulty with the fullest of our resources, with full access to our individual dignity. And we don't then suffer because of that pain and difficulty. Now, we might wonder, well, where do these defenses and this anxiety come from? Where do we learn that these feelings are so intolerable in the first place? Well, here's where we can introduce the second triangle in Davanloo's model. And this is the triangle of the person, where he says that what is occurring is often learned through past relationships. It is deployed in present relationships. And we see it show up in the therapeutic transference over and over and over again. So I know that when I'm working with a client, if there's some friction in our relationship, this is likely not just a matter of our relationship. This is perhaps indicative of some pattern that shows up elsewhere in their lives, with the romantic partners, business partners, friends, people they bump into on the street, that sort of thing. And this didn't just show up at random. This is a way that they learn to cope with situations in past relationships. So what then happens is, in the past, they learned that a certain feeling or an affective state was intolerable. Now, let's say, for example, that you are a boy or a young man in Western society, and you're told, don't cry, don't be such a pussy, man up, all this sort of thing. What you might then do is learn to repress the affect of sadness and not to express grief when you are grieving. Or, like many of us, we learn that anger is a destructive emotion, that the affective experience of anger is intolerable. And so we need to clamp that down, to push it down as far and out of our awareness as possible, to be a good boy or a good girl. Some people also learn that something like excitement is intolerable, that positive feelings actually are not good, either because they were punished for that, maybe it's too much for their caretakers to handle, or because they've simply been let down and disappointed so many times and to such an intense degree in the past. So if we experience these conflicts in our past relationships, well, we have to learn to cope with them somehow because we're dependent on our caretakers. And the way that we cope with those things is by engaging in defensive behaviors. And these defenses, again, are ways to blur our experience, to avoid the specificity of experience. And it's that specificity that really allows for the transformation of that experience. But if we're in a situation where our survival depends on not feeling angry, not feeling sad, not feeling excited, well, we're going to do our best not to feel that, to increase our chances of maintaining the attachments upon which our survival depends. Now, where am I getting with this? Well, if you find yourself in repeated situations over and over and over again, if you find that you're looking around and going, oh, geez, here I am grabbing a drink again, just that fast. Or, man, I keep trying to quit smoking, but I'm smoking again. Or, God, I just keep dating people who are terrible for me. Or whatever the case is. Well, there's a way that perhaps you haven't actually gotten the lesson that life, or the unconscious, or whatever metaphor you want to call it, is trying to teach. So I'll introduce a concept from another psychoanalytic theorist. This one is Ignacio Marablanco, and he describes that when we experience repetition, you can see here that there's a line with these 4 points, A, B, C, A. Let's call A any situation that you find yourself in over and over and over again. What Marablanco developed as a way to conceptualize this is the idea that this geometric figure of a line is actually one dimension less than this, which is the same points represented in a higher dimension. So you have a one-dimensional representation trying to get A, B, and C mapped out on a line, and that's the way that you map out at one fewer dimensions this figure of a triangle A, B, C. Now, I know that that's a weird geometric conceptualization, but what we're trying to really indicate here is that if you want to be true to this figure in one fewer dimensions, that necessitates the repetition of something. Because in order to close the loop of A, B, C, A, to do that in one fewer dimension than this, you have to repeat it. So what does that mean? Well, that means that much of what we are aware of consciously as repetitive, what's so often known as repetition compulsion in psychoanalytic theory, is actually something like an unconscious formation or a pattern or some aesthetic organizing form that we've not yet become aware of. And that this is actually something like the unconscious attempting to map onto consciousness some other form. There's another idea from another theorist in another branch of study named Gregory Bateson, one of the early cybernetics theorists. And at one point he says that meaning is roughly synonymous with information, with pattern, and with redundancy. Now that's a weird idea, but maybe if we find ourselves repeating this over and over and over again, if we find that we're drinking again when we want to stop drinking, or we're smoking, or we're dating someone who's bad for us, or again, whatever, we might look around and go, what is the meaning of this? What does this mean? Why am I suffering here again? And I think there really is something significant to Bateson's idea that it's synonymous with information, with pattern, and with this redundancy. Now, this redundancy is meaningful in a way. It is informative of some pattern that we're not yet able to perceive. Now, what's that pattern? It's something like this. The relationships between the feelings we have repressed, the anxiety that we then develop, and the defenses we engage in to distance ourselves from those feelings and from that anxiety. And so if you're looking around in this moment of repetition, wondering, why the hell am I here again? What am I not getting, universe? If you find that there's something going on in your present relationships, or something with your coach or therapist that may be similar to something you learned in the past, well, the way out of it is to figure out what you are doing habitually. That's your defense. Once you know what you are doing, you can stop doing that. Now, I know that seems a little simplistic, but look, when we're in a state of repetition compulsion, we are essentially perceiving that this is the only thing to do. And the ever-present option is to stop doing what we're doing. And I can't highlight the importance of that enough. If you can stop doing that behavior, if you can stop engaging in that defense, that at least clears a space where some new option can emerge. Now, when you stop that, it's going to be incredibly anxiety-provoking, because the question is going to be, well, what the hell else do I do now? What am I supposed to do if I don't drink? What am I supposed to do if I don't smoke? What am I supposed to do if I don't date this person? Who else is going to have me? I don't know what else to do. That uncertainty, that's anxiety. That disorientation, that tension that occurs, that's anxiety. And as I mentioned before, the way out of this is simply to get at the feeling underneath this. Now, why the feeling? Feelings tell us what matter, in what way, and to what degree. Feelings are the compass that we use, the emotions, the affective experience. These tell us what matters, in what way it matters, and how much it matters. And if we don't have that, well, then it's no wonder we're disoriented. If we're out of touch with our experience of value in the world, well, no wonder we find ourselves going back through the same situations over and over and over again. Because if we can't connect with that affective experience, we're unable to perceive the errors of our trials, which means that we're not able to learn from our experience. These events can keep happening to us, but they fail to deepen into experience. We don't learn from those events. In other words, we are not informed by our experience. And I mean that like in-formed. Because here's the thing. The events that we encounter, the situations we find ourselves in, when we learn from these things, we are formed by them in a different way. They pattern us moving forward. And if we're not able to recognize those things, we're going to keep finding ourselves in these recurring situations. We're going to keep enacting patterns of prior relationships in our present relationships. And until we get at the feelings that underlie that we've turned from and repressed for so long, we're going to continue to suffer, because we're going to continue behaving in the same way in an attempt to distance ourselves from what we experience. In doing so, we only falsify our experience. There's no way we can be true to ourselves at that point. And when that's the case, that's when we suffer. So hopefully all of this is making at least some sense. These can be weird ideas to get our heads around at the outset. But if I were going to encourage you to do something, it would be to recognize when you find yourself in this repetitive situation that there is something in the unconscious, let's say, that is attempting to map itself into conscious awareness, the only way that it knows how. Now, what you are likely perceiving are the consequences of certain behaviors, certain defenses that you've engaged in, so as to distance yourself from anxiety and from the affect. So again, the ever-present option, even if you don't know what to do, if you know what hasn't been working, at the very least, you can stop doing that thing. You can pause, you can wait, and you can then watch the anxiety arise, and it will likely arise quite quickly. And the question is, what am I underneath of this anxiety? How am I feeling about this situation? Or how am I feeling toward this person? And the more honest we can be with that, the more honest we can be with our own experience. As I mentioned, the reason why we focus on feelings in this sort of practice is because feelings tell us what matter, in what way it matters, and to what degree it matters. And if we want to be able to steer our lives toward anything of value, if we want to be able to do so with a sense of intentionality, being deliberate with our only experience at living life, we have to be connected to that internal compass. And to the extent that we're not, to the extent that we cover over our feelings with anxiety and blur our experience through defensive behaviors, we become disoriented. We become disenchanted. We seem to be beset by the circumstances around us, losing our sense of agency at that point. So I hope all of this makes sense. And as you can see, it is incredibly complex to get a handle on these things, but there are some really simple principles that govern it. So what I would recommend you do is have a little think about this. First of all, maybe you jot down situations that you are tired of finding yourself in over and over and over again. Maybe then you take a really honest inventory of some of the behaviors that you've engaged in that might contribute to that situation. When in doubt, one of the things that I find most useful is to imagine that there is a little bird that sits on the windowsill and it watches you all day, every day. Now, the bird doesn't see your thoughts. It doesn't see your feelings or anything like that. All the bird sees are your observable behaviors. The bird sees demonstrable activity. So if you reflect on this, what does the little bird see you do all day, every day? Where does the little bird see you do that? And with whom? And then what does the little bird see happen next? This can give you a bit of a zoomed out lens to bring a little more outside perspective on some of your own behaviors. And if you start to notice that there are these patterns that occur over and over and over, the first thing, the only thing really to do at the start, is to pause for a moment. Pause and just watch as all of that anxious stuff creeps up within you. The next time you go to reach for a drink, the next time you go to pick your nails, the next time you go to call that ex that by God you promised you would stop calling, or whatever the case is, pause for a moment. You'll be anxious, right? But then a couple of questions can help at that point. First, you might ask, how am I right now? And sure, maybe the answer is, God, I'm stressed out, or I'm so anxious, or I'm overwhelmed, or whatever. The second question is, how do I know how I am? So what are the signals in the body? What physically is happening right then and right there that lets you know, that helps inform this evaluation of how you are. Then the next step is, what's one small thing you could do to, let's say, be true to that perception? What does that perception ask of you? So if, simple example, I notice that I'm thirsty, maybe I notice that my mouth's a little dry, maybe I notice that my energy levels are low, whatever the case is, well, what does that ask for? It asks for me to take a drink. Well, so then I could go and take a drink, and I could close the loop there and think, well, how am I now, having done that? And how do I know? And what you'll find is that this feedback loop gets you more and more clearly in tune with the body level information that you are using moment to moment to make all of these psychological decisions, all of these mental and emotional decisions in your life. They find their root in some embodied experience. So that sort of questioning is what can help get you more and more keenly tuned into some of the feeling underlying these conflicts in your life. And when you can do that, when you can feel your feelings to the greatest intensity you can tolerate and be true to that experience, that's the way out of suffering. Because at that point, you will still encounter difficulties. You will still encounter pain, but you will be less reliant on compulsive defenses in an attempt to negate that experience. Defenses which you no doubt learned in your past relationships and that continue to show up in the present. And when you're no longer compelled by those habits, then you have the freedom to engage in self-creation again. You can make a deliberate choice rather than driven onward by historical compensations. What we're looking to do, essentially, is suspend your dependence on the patterns by which you maintained a sense of security in the past. We're looking to suspend that, to pause for just a moment and to see, is this in line with how I'd like to be moving forward? Is this creating the kind of future that I want to inhabit? And these are difficult questions to ask oneself, but, well, you're capable of dealing with difficulty. You've been through enough difficulty thus far, and this, although it's hard work, well, I think you can do this too. So, anyway, I hope these ideas have been useful, fruitful. I hope they inspire not only some thought on your part, but some action as well. And again, if you'd like to take a more thorough look at this and get a sense of how you can really start getting the body involved in this as well, go to bodymindclass.com and you will see an in-depth training that I put together there. It's free. It's just waiting for you. So head on over there, or in the meantime, leave a comment down below here. Let me know what you think. And, well, until next time, take care.